I am very humbled to introduce Jonathan Noble. So Jonathan Noble is the Senior Director of Government Affairs in Infrastructure, I think I got that all right, from Microsoft. And we are just so glad to have him here today to talk about Microsoft's approach to data centers, but also what that means for West Michigan. So if you'll join me in welcoming Jonathan.
So real quickly, as mentioned, Jonathan Noble, Infrastructure, Government Affairs. I am privileged enough to have a national role where I get to work with state leaders, local leaders around the country as we look to build out the modern infrastructure that we all rely on every day. Real quick intro slide. Clearly, technology has become part of our everyday lives. We all know it. We wake up in the morning, what's the first thing we do? We reach for our cell phones. We're not doing it to make a call to mom. We're not doing it to make a call to the kids who aren't even up yet. We're doing it to kind of check what's going on, turn off our alarms, et cetera. And it's not simply cell phones, although that's clearly one of the most obvious ways for it. It's every part of our lives. Every financial transaction we make right now relies on a data center, relies on technology. 21 internet-connected devices on average per household in the US. That has grown 20%, 25% over just the past 3 years. You think about all the devices you buy and you're like, okay, I need to figure out the Wi-Fi code. You go to your file, you go online, you're like, all right, attach it to your Wi-Fi, all of a sudden it begins to work. Without that, your personal life doesn't work. All this relies on a data center. They are really at the heart of the internet. During COVID, many of us found out how important broadband was to our world, to our ability to function. Broadband without data centers on the back end are simply pipes to nowhere. This is critical infrastructure. Same way railroads were 150 years ago, same way roads were 70, 80 years ago, the way energy has been over the past 100+ years, shout out to consumers. And it's not simply us as individuals. Let's be clear. As individuals, we are generating a lot of data, we are using a lot of data, but it's also as businesses. If you think about your supply chain management, if you think about your payroll, if you think about your interactions with customers, all that is done via data centers now, in 99% of the cases, I'm sure. Then you think about even next step. For those of you who are in manufacturing, you're getting those designs now online. You're often feeding them into the machine. All that is cloud enabled at this point. If you're in ag, you're getting in your tractor to plow those fields like my family has done for a long time. That tractor is no longer not enabled, right? Like, you've got more electronics in that tractor than I do in my car. Never mind the fact that my car has a lot more electronics in it than it did, say, even 10 years ago, never mind 20. So we are enabling every sector of the industry to be more effective, to grow, to reach out and be more effective about the interactions with customers, be able to meet the customers where they are, wherever they are, and do it with groups like you all here from Western Michigan, from wherever you might be. We, of course, serve many of the biggest companies around the globe, but also here in Michigan. This is infrastructure that we all rely on, including the businesses here. It's government, as I've highlighted, private sector, every sector of the economy is really relying on this infrastructure day in, day out for everything that we do. Let's talk a little bit about what a data center is. Some of you may remember that data centers used to be what you had in the closet, down the hall, in the room, down the hall, the floor below you, what have you. As our need for data, our collection of data, and our need for compute to manage that data, to make that data actionable, has increased, so has the size of these facilities. So we are now looking at facilities that can be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of square feet large. Last 90 days of last year, Microsoft spent $37 billion building out this infrastructure. That speaks to the demand that is out there. We are not doing this for us. We are serving customers. We're serving people like yourselves with this infrastructure. You all are using it through every single different application you have running in your business, on your phone as individuals, your kids, et cetera. Education runs out of these data centers. But the advantage of having this physical manifestation of the cloud is it generates a lot of jobs as well as other benefits to the community. Let me talk a little bit before I dive into there about what decisions we look at when we are deciding where we locate. First and foremost, customer demand. There is a benefit to being close to these facilities. We all think about latency in a bunch of different ways. The easiest way for me to describe latency is when you hop onto your phone, you press a button, and all you get is a spinning dial. It drives you nuts, right? The closer you are to these facilities, that dial stops spinning. It's a pain in the butt when we're trying to get onto one of our social media accounts. It has massive economic impacts as a business who's looking to make those decisions, collect that data, compute that data, and move on to the next computation. If essentially the latency is causing you a delay, that's just lost time. So proximity to these facilities matters. Network access. As we found out with broadband, phones don't work, it's a bad thing. Data centers without network access, they're really useless, right? So clearly that is critical. Suitable land, these are large facilities. They take up a lot of space. That space needs to be fairly flat. We need to be responsible to the environment, be sensitive to wetlands, things of that nature. So we need to make sure the land's suitable. The other piece is that we need to be part of the community. This is a part that Microsoft takes very, very seriously. For us, that means working with local elected officials, working with the local community around, here's what we're proposing. Let's talk about how we make sure that that is appropriate to the community. And this is a long-term investment. You know, these are hundreds of millions of dollars. We're not going anywhere, right? So we want that partnership to be there from the start and to build on it thereafter. Qualified personnel. One of the advantages of data centers is they actually require a wide range of skill sets. You know, we work with community colleges around the country on a certificate program that's 8 to 9 months. All you need is a high school diploma, you get that certificate, you're eligible for one of the jobs at the data center. It's not simply folks who are coming out from name their university, including some of the great universities you have in this state. It can be people from every walk of life. It's a diversity of employment that people don't associate with tech, but is very, very much alive in these facilities. And then energy, access to energy is absolutely critical. Microsoft has a little bit of a unique approach. We made an announcement back in January about our commitments to the community. It really comes down to a few high-level things. We'll pay our way to ensure our data centers don't increase your prices. We work with the utilities on any number of levels to make sure this has happened. When we're talking about substations that are being built on these sites, we're talking about the last mile connections, which is often many more than just a mile. We are paying for that full freight, right? We're also working with utilities to make sure that we have rates that ensure we're paying for the generation we need, we're paying for the transmission we need. In addition, the contracts are unique. This is both by design. Utilities are ruthlessly disciplined about making sure that the large load users are not shifting costs and that they're paying their fair share. It's also enforced regulatorily. The state of Michigan has some very stringent requirements around what our agreements with utilities look like, and they get to check. It's not like our experience at home where we have a deal, no one's looking at it, we're good. Our deals are big enough that everybody looks at them, right? Make sure that we're doing what we need to. They include minimum payments. So no matter how much energy we're using, we're on the hook. If we're using less than the amount we said we are, we still have to pay full freight. It's a unique experience, but it protects other ratepayers. If there's an exit fee, like say a deal falls apart at the last minute and the utility has expended money, we're on the hook. There are other contractual obligations within these tariff structures that are really geared towards protecting ratepayer. It's something Microsoft takes very, very seriously. your utilities here take very, very seriously. And by the way, the regulators do too, right? It's not simply, hey, trust us. There are checks and balances in this system. I think what you're seeing is in communities where the utility is really doing a great job of managing their growth in partnership with us, other large users, you're actually seeing rates come down. AEP just announced within the Indiana, Michigan level of rate case that they're going to be lowering rates. In Georgia, they announced that rates will be frozen for 3 years, and then after that, rates will go down, base rates will go down. Clearly, that is just part of the energy conversation, but it's an important part. We are also saying we'll minimize our water use and replenish more water than we use. People are asking us, what does that mean? Well, it means we work with utilities to improve their systems so that they're not losing as much water through leaks, et cetera. Some utilities lose 30, 50, 60% of their water just through leaks in the system, especially older systems. We partner with them to bring in technology to go inspect those pipes, close up those leaks, and all of a sudden they're losing much less, recapturing all that water. We work with conservancy organizations around wetland preservation, headland preservation. We work to secure water rights so that that water is staying in the system, it's not being pulled out of the system. There's a lot of different strategies here. We work with the local community to figure out which one is most appropriate to you all, in addition to all the technology innovation that we are seeing to make sure that we are reducing our own water use at these facilities. We'll create jobs for your residents. I'll dive a little bit more into this down the road. We'll add to the tax base that funds local hospitals, schools, parks, and libraries. One of the things Microsoft pledged back in January is we will not take advantage of local property tax incentive programs. In fact, around the country, we've gone to several communities and said, you all were kind enough to provide us this opportunity. You wanted us here. We so appreciate it. We're going to unwind the agreement that you already did. So as we talk about these new sites in Michigan that we are exploring, we are not pursuing local tax incentives for property tax. Those taxes fund your county programs, in particular your schools, fire, police, local agencies of all type. And by the way, when you are doing property tax on not simply a building that costs hundreds of millions of dollars, but also the equipment inside, which also costs hundreds of millions of dollars, that's not insignificant. And then we'll strengthen community by investing in training in nonprofits. Microsoft has a whole host of programs where we work with nonprofits, educators around cybersecurity, IT, CS, and even AI. Those programs, we work with local partners to figure out what's the best fit for your community. There's no one size fit all here. We recognize every community is different. This dives in and kind of explains a little bit more of what I just went through. I'm actually going to blast through it because I just talked about it at length. Our community first work is already underway. Let's talk about some examples because that's what folks are looking for. It's like, you're saying this, but are you living it? The answer is yes. In Des Moines, Iowa, we've invested millions of dollars into their infrastructure, water infrastructure, et cetera, that's helping the entire system operate better. We're creating local jobs. As an industry in Virginia, you talk to the various trades there, 65% of some of the trades are solely dedicated to work that's happening in data centers. I have seen studies that show that without data center investment, without that building, without that construction of this critical infrastructure that enables all of us to do what we do as business leaders, the domestic growth in the US would not be too robust. These are really important jobs. And let's also talk about duration. Some folks are really focused on the fact that construction jobs, short term, these are multi-phase projects. They often take years to build out. In some communities where we have been for 15, 20 years, there are people in the construction trades, not Microsoft employees, but in the construction trades, who have known nothing but a Microsoft job. They have moved from building to building, site to site within their region, enabling them to settle there, buy homes there, raise their families there. These are well-paying jobs and they're long-term jobs. Adding to the tax base, I mentioned the fact that the amounts that local governments collect can be staggering. West Des Moines, $182 million in city, street, and utility improvements from these data center investments. Central Washington, $26.4 million. Cheyenne, Wyoming, $60 million. That's just from Microsoft. Loudoun County, no one is going to be another Loudoun County, let's be clear. It's right near Dulles Airport. They are next to the largest cloud customer on the planet by orders of magnitude. That being said, they are the data center capital of the world. 60% of their property taxes come from data centers. That is a high service community that offers tax breaks, and yet still 60% of their property tax comes from data centers. It has enabled them to lower the millage rate on residential properties. 7 or 8 out of the last 10 years, they have the lowest residential tax rates in the state. Investing in training. Let's talk about energy a little bit. Let's talk about water. Let's talk about waste. These are important issues for communities around the country. When it comes to energy, as I highlighted, we work with our utility providers to make sure that our energy doesn't impact your rates, but we also try to do it in a responsible way. We work with utility providers to bring on more green energy resources, bring in more resiliency into these systems. And by doing so, we've actually been able to match our energy use with carbon-free energy generation on a one-for-one basis. We are very proud to have achieved this goal, and we're going to continue to exceed this goal. We are actually the largest contractor of carbon removal from the air and on the globe. This is an important part too, because our goal is not simply to match what we're doing, but to exceed. Water. We're designing data centers to use less and less, and I'll talk to that a little bit more in depth. And waste. These facilities are operating facilities, right? We're not the same as a manufacturer, but at the same time, these servers are run hard. We're all using them a lot, including, I see some people around this room right now. It's okay, I don't mind. So that means those servers have to be replaced. But instead of simply taking them and throwing them in the trash, we take them, we look at what parts can be saved, what parts can be used. It may not be suitable for us, but it might work for another provider. We make sure we're recycling as much of that as possible and diverting it from various waste streams. Let's talk about cooling. It's a top issue because with cooling comes water. Traditionally, Microsoft really leverages the climates in which we're located. We use outside air to the absolute degree possible. It's more efficient, lower cost. It's the right thing to do. Makes a lot of sense. Traditionally, we have married that with evaporative cooling. This is a little bit more of a water-intensive level of cooling, but I will say that one, as I mentioned, we rely on air cooling the majority of the time. Even in hot areas, say Atlanta, we're using the evaporative cooling a couple months a year, right? Because as we put in new chips, we're able to run them at hotter temperatures. We're able to use that evaporative cooling less and less time. Our buildings, even in a hot climate like Georgia, use much less water than a lot of other developments, never mind some of the ag and other uses that we're seeing up here. Air-cooled chillers, these are the chillers that everyone's familiar with. You see them on buildings, you see them at hospitals, you see them at schools. You all have small versions at your homes. And we're combining that with chip-level cooling. So let me talk about this evolution. We are building AI into our cooling systems. The way data centers are developed, it is definitely a form follows function, with function leading the way. These are built to house millions of servers. They are built to be able to cool those servers as they operate. It's not necessarily the architecture of your home where you're like, hey, it's all about curb appeal. It's all about, hey, how do these buildings function? So we're also using AI to optimize that. What type of systems can we do? If we know the weather is going to be a certain thing, let's automate the fact that we don't need to be flipping a switch when we're able to turn off the evaporative cooling and go to air cooling. Let's have that automated. Liquid cooling innovation. At the bottom, you're kind of seeing this kind of evolution of cooling that is really changing the way data centers manage their cooling. Traditionally, you cooled the entire building, right? And then you move to, I'm just going to cool certain parts of the building, where the chips are, where the servers are, create hot cold aisles. Now, we're going down to how do we just cool the chip that is doing the work and therefore generating the heat. You do that by running liquid underneath that chip, pulling the heat out, and then cooling that liquid and running it back. But what does that mean? It's a closed loop system. I was talking to a neighbor the other day who was thinking about it, was like, oh, it's kind of like the radiant heat you have in some homes. You put the fluid into the radiant heat, you forget about it forever, your floors are warm when they need to be, you're good to go, but you're not using any more water. So just to tie off on that, what does that mean? It means the water that these use once we fill up the system is limited to what the employees need day to day. Going to the restroom, sinks, things of that nature. These aren't manufacturing facilities, so it's not like we're washing down tons of equipment. We're not using water to keep temperatures down. If your manufacturing processes require it, et cetera, the amount of water these use once operational with this technology is quite minimal. You know, these buildings have approximately 50 people per building. Campuses might have 200 to 300 people on them. When you do the math on that, the water is, like I said, negligible. Now, once again, new technology, right? Not everyone has heard that story. Not everyone understands that's where the industry is going, but it's very much the direction we're all headed as we become more and more sensitive to water, but also as the technology demands us to make these changes. How does this design come about? Look, like any other process, we design a building. We look at every single system. We figure out what the demands of that system are, and then we go talk to the utilities. Same relationship we have with the energy providers, where we're saying, we don't need 100% of energy on day one. These are phased projects. We might be talking to them about a 10, 15, 20-year ramp. Same thing with water. How do we make sure the systems are being built to meet our needs, but not exceed our needs? How do we make sure that if systems need to be upgraded, we're paying it and shouldering the cost for those upgrades? So we plan for that demand. And then we build the infrastructure. We work with the utility providers on what those agreements look like. But once again, same way I've talked about energy, our goal is to make sure the infrastructure costs associated with our projects don't get slid to other ratepayers, other people in the community. Talked a little bit about this, but let me dive a little bit deeper. Construction jobs, long-term jobs, high-paying jobs. This is really high-skilled labor that go on for a long, long time. Iron, pipe fitters, plumbers, electricians, of course. You know, these facilities have miles and miles and miles of fiber in them, of wires, et cetera. From an engineering perspective, they're incredible, and honestly, the people who build them have skill sets that are just off the charts. So a lot happening on data center construction. In the course of construction, look, we've got sites around the country that have 2, 3, 4, 5,000 people a day on that site. Those are very large projects. Our standard projects have hundreds every single day for a long, long time. These are good jobs, they're long-term jobs. Kind of thinking back to the presentation we had earlier about the high rises and all the placemaking that's going on here locally, which is fantastic to see. I love urban planning. I'm a little bit of a nerd on that fact, how I kind of slid into this work. But what you all have created here is amazing. But imagine if a developer came up and said, hey, over the next 10 years, I'm going to be building building after building after building over 8, 10, 12 years. As a community, you guys would be like, awesome. Like, that type of investment has spillover effects everywhere, to all the vendors, all the contractors, subcontractors, folks who are servicing it from security, like all these different layers. So a lot of different jobs that go into the construction piece over a long term. Data center operations, campus management, people management, critical environment. Look, these servers need a lot of hand-holding. They're working hard. We need people running around these buildings, making sure that they are operating, that we're operating efficiently, and when they need to be replaced, they can be replaced. That being said, compared to a lot of other industrial uses, we don't generate traffic. We have these things operate 24/7, so it means that the shifts happen quietly. We're not putting strain on roads. There's not a lot of truck traffic, box truck or two a day. Once again, as a neighbor, they tend to be pretty darn quiet and nice from an operations perspective. As I kind of laid out, this has ripple effects. When you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars at a particular location, that money tends to spread around the community. We have seen it time and time again, where as the industry grows, you see contractors begin to grow, and you see the type of contractors grow. HVAC folks, clearly IBEW, landscaping, all these various folks who are coming about and growing to serve the industry is absolutely amazing impact on the communities in which we're located. In closing, I wanted to just talk a little bit about our approach. First and foremost, thank you for the team that's here today. We've pulled people from all over the country for a series of meetings, meeting with the community this week. We have sat down, talked to 400, 450 people, small one-on-one conversations. Come up, talk to the subject matter experts around all the issues that I've touched upon today. We want to have those conversations. We recognize that whenever you're talking about development at this scale, people can, should have questions. We want to be able to respond to those questions. That's the reason why we have dedicated resources. When you email us, it's not simply going into a void, customer service, round file here. That's not what's happening, right? We have people who are dedicated to responding to those emails, providing answers to the questions that we're having. And sometimes we'll know the answer, sometimes we're not at a place to know the answer yet because we're so early in the process. We haven't done the analysis. We take these projects very, very seriously. We do all the studies. Some of the concerns we hear from the community is like, hey, you're going to break X, Y, and Z. We're committed to not break X, Y, and Z because honestly, like you all, we rely on the infrastructure that you all rely on. We are going to be stewards of that infrastructure. We are going to be advocates for that infrastructure. And we're going to back up that advocacy with our own funds, right? So we are committed to being a good neighbor, a neighbor that helps improve the communities in which we're located, provide a lot of benefits to those communities, and do so the right way. In doing so, we are also building out the critical infrastructure we all rely on, individually, as organizations, as government. 911 systems, military, every single operation you all are kind of doing, all ties back to data centers in one way or another. I also want to take this moment to also just highlight, this is compute. It's compute of all types. Microsoft was growing at 25 to 35% a year in our Azure standard cloud offering. That was before there was the large language models that we're talking about today. We're doing that, and we're growing that fast because as a society, we need this infrastructure. We need it for our operations, we need it for our daily lives. We are working hard to deliver it. In years past, those infrastructure development at this scale has often been a public-private, if not straight public investment. When you think about trains, planes, automobiles, electricity, sewer systems, water systems, et cetera. In this case, this is critical infrastructure we all rely on, costs of which are being borne by industry. And so we take that responsibility very seriously to make sure that we are providing that critical infrastructure that we all rely on and do it in a responsible way, thus the commitments I highlighted, thus our approach in terms of being part of the community, listening to the community, and responding to the community.